Hello, I'm Tom Ferguson and welcome to The Fundamental Molecule. This show explores the intersection of water, technology, and entrepreneurship. Each week, I interview innovators, experts, entrepreneurs, and investors in the world of water, helping us understand where this trillion-dollar industry is headed. These are the stories of the people building the future of the world's most valuable and fundamental resource.
Disclaimer. Tom Ferguson is the managing partner of Virgin Island Ventures. All opinions expressed by Tom and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinions of Virgin Island Ventures. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be viewed as investment advice or relied upon as a basis for investment decisions.
It's always worth paying attention to top-level consultants. As crucial advisors to their usually enormous clients, they have their finger on the pulse of the practical needs of the market and are responsive when they see critical mass in an area. Sarah Brody runs the water practice at McKinsey, which she has restarted in response to considerable client demand from mega-cap corporates to private equity firms. Alongside recent acquisitions of specialist water teams by BCG and Roland Berger, among others, the mainstreaming of water advice for major clients is a very interesting leading indicator of the increasing attention being paid to the fundamental molecule. Sarah is a proper intrapreneur and has done exceptional work building the business on behalf of her clients. She really elucidates the role that firms like McKinsey play in the sector, and she has an excellent water origin story. Please enjoy my conversation with Sarah Brody. Sarah, how wonderful to see you. It's always a pleasure. Welcome to The Fundamental Molecule. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Excellent, excellent. So I think it's such an interesting leading indicator when McKinsey takes notice of things. And one of the sort of the biggest sort of ticks in the box of, oh, okay, maybe we're heading in the right direction is when I heard that they'd reestablished the water practice with you at the helm, which is sort of tick in that we think that that is a wise idea, and tick in that it was a very wise idea to put you in charge of it. So
On both counts.
what did you see that led you to reestablish the water practice? What was it that put that into effect?
I'll skip past the point about water being something I've personally been passionate about for a long time.
Oh, we'll get back to that.
We'll get back to that. Exactly. So we'll circle back there and we'll talk about the market signals because as you said, McKinsey is, if we know one thing, it's a market signal. Back in 2015, when I joined the firm and I was eager to do sustainability work, sustainability was for the most part a glimmer in people's eye. In the US and North America, at least, with the exception of a few folks who were working on clean tech and talking about renewables with utilities, with investors, and even with some of the renewables developers. So for a while at McKinsey, we started really going in on the energy transition. We built out a very distinctive practice, serve now all kinds of clients on energy transition topics. But a few years ago, the world, our clients, McKinsey started waking up to the fact that one, sustainability is about more than energy and decarbonization. And two, climate adaptation is a real and present topic that is going to become more and more important. Already is important. Is only going to become more important in the coming years. And water, I see, is really the confluence of those two things. McKinsey realized that. Our clients have realized that, and that's why we're seeing an uptick in interest in water topics from across a bunch of different sectors. And so fundamentally, it's the combination of McKinsey having a strong view that this is going to be important and the demand signal that we're starting to see from clients where we say, wow, we really need to establish a service line and a practice around that. So now we have a global water service line again. I'm leading in North America. I have counterparts globally and really excited about the work we're doing.
I want to dive into that demand signal. What do you think has changed? Is this just a realization that actually a whole bunch of negative things are happening to income statements and balance sheets, and as a result, like, oh my God, we should get ahead of this? Or is this even further, like, sort of thinking ahead of everything from supply chain disruption to where the hell are we going to put our semiconductor fab or whatever it would be? Like, what do you think are the determinants of that demand signal that you're responding to?
I will say with water, there are some things that have stayed constant even throughout the years when we didn't have a formal water practice and now. And so, we have and continue to serve water and wastewater utilities on strategy and operational topics. This is global. And we bring a lot of value. We bring a lot of the work we do with utilities across power, gas, waste, et cetera. We bring those tools. So that demand, I would say, is we are starting to look at more strategic topics with utilities, whether that's climate resiliency, whether that's PFAS, whether that's other things. But in general, that work has been constant. Where we're seeing new demand signals, I would say, are really in two parts. One is new companies within the water value chain. So these would be industrials and tech companies, as well as investors who are thinking about building, starting, investing in businesses linked to water. And that has been, I would say, over the last few years, a pretty distinct uptick in excitement. This is not unique to water. We've seen this in other kind of parts of the clean technology and climate technology. I think one thing that's interesting for water is the extent to which incumbents who are in industrials generally are now interested in water as a adjacency or as a theme to build on.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
So that's one thing. I would say the other piece is starting to be industrials and corporates who use a lot of water, need to dispose of wastewater, who are thinking really strategically about the risk issues inherent in water, both consumption, disposal, quality, et cetera. That is a little bit more nascent, and we're starting to see it in kind of isolated instances, mining, a little food and bev. But I think that is the part that will really continue to grow in importance.
So interesting you bring up the mining side of things. So before I do whatever it is that I do now, so prior to my MBA, before 2012, I worked for ERM, the sustainability consultancy, and I did a lot of work on the sustainability and climate change kind of strategy world. And part of that was within water. And it was so striking. I was working for a mining multinational, and it was we were doing this study for them where they wanted to do a copper mine in Chile. And they were, it was a sort of quite blasé in the way in which they were sort of throwing around, well, do we do the desal plant and then pipe it up onto the top of the Andes, or do we find some other solution? It was absolutely extraordinary. The mode and scale of interaction of those kinds of fundamental industries with water. It was such an interesting introduction to it. Okay, so I just wanted to go into this idea of emerging incumbents, sort of looking, and then potentially, I don't know whether you can shed light on the world of investors as well, sort of looking more and more at water as a potential source of, return, basically.
Yeah, a business opportunity, a new business opportunity.
Yeah, it's a business opportunity, because I still think that we are cursed in I think it's partly our fault, basically, that everybody assumes that this is sort of sludgy and crap, and that there are sales cycles and there aren't any margins, and everybody's just going to regulate you out of existence, and this is a fundamental human right, and people are going to take away your, all of the crap that we deal with on a fundamental basis. But it sounds like people are actually looking at this on a dollars and cents basis and saying, is there anything that you want to kind of unpack there that you think either has changed, or whether this is just a mindset? Is this a function of the gross size of water? Is it a perception that water is actually doable, which historically has not necessarily been the case?
I think it is overall the realization that water is going to be a growth market. It's both very defensive in that water's not going away anytime soon. And so it's very stable, and there are real growth tailwinds. And that's what people get very excited about. On the flip side, and I think this is often what we help companies realize and start to work through, is that all of the barriers around sales cycles, around a really complicated value chain, around something that is for industrial customers, like a utility off to the side where you have to go through 8 different OEM and consulting engineer and, system integrator type players to sell your thing. Those barriers all still remain. And I think that it can be challenging. It's part of what we help companies think through as in their strategy, but it is definitely, I would say, a not small reason why water remains not for the faint of heart.
We're going to come back to the system integrator, because I would love to speak to a McKinsey consultant about what you see the kind of I don't know whether we're going to go SWOT. Probably people don't use SWOT analyses anymore. So it's something anyway. But we can construct some kind of 2x2 and just rock out. But I want to take us back before we go any further into that. So you are a PhD, unlike myself. You have actual qualifications. Both my partners are PhDs. I am not. So it's a source of much inferiority complex.
You're pretty smart, Tom. I know.
So what yeah. So thank you. So what made you pursue a PhD in oceanography, and how does coming from an oceans background inform the way in which you think about it? We're asked about oceans all the time. It's actually not really within our circle of competence. So I just want to give you the space to reflect on it.
I mean, I think growing up, I was always kind of a science nerd. I also spent a lot of time just growing up. I had family who lived near Woods Hole, which, as
Cool.
fellow nerds know, is like
Yes.
the Paris of oceanography.
Yeah.
Exactly. So
It's so awesome.
yeah, so I kind of learned what this thing was and that there were actual people who studied the oceans. And it was always kind of on my mind for a long time, even growing up. In college and in, my studies, I actually started out as kind of more of a traditional science, physics, chemistry type person, and then felt like that was not applied enough. Like it's very hard to see the linkage to the real world. Whereas when you get into earth science, you very quickly, like you are literally out in the real world. Part of what I did in college was core samples to look at earthquake records from the 1700s in the Pacific Northwest to look for signals of past earthquakes to see if there was any indicators about the next big one. So really enjoyed that. And that's what I ended up kind of getting my PhD in, which is around ocean physics. So it's kind of a mix of physics and then oceanography. And then eventually realized that academia was still not quite applied, hard to see the real world application. And so that's when I made the jump into consulting and industry. And so here I am. But it's always been something I've been really excited about. And now I'm a freshwater person, which, as you know, is a bit of a different sphere from the oceans. But I've learned.
Welcome to the party. It's fun.
Exactly.
No, but it's really great because I think it's so important to understand what you don't know, especially as an investor. And the oceans is something that I'm not as au fait with. I was just swapping emails with the excellent Reese Pacheco, who run Propeller, who's an amazing guy. So how do you think about, putting your consultancy hat on the moment, just reflecting on the ocean side of things? There's a huge amount of interest in terms of being able to invest and improve and, build business cases in and around the oceans. Have you spent much time thinking about the overlap of businesses and protecting the oceans?
I would say so. Me and more broadly, McKinsey, we have started to. We have, I would say our water practice has a sister practice, which is our nature service line, where a lot of the questions around how to finance and fund both terrestrial and ocean conservation come in. So there's been a lot of really cool work we've done there. And then we're starting to see ocean investments also come into our pipeline and start to get some interest. I know CDR is one that's near and dear to your heart.
Yeah, exactly. Looking at you, Aquatic Labs. Actually, Alan he has a lab at Woods Hole. Alan Adam from Aquatic Labs, amazing guy. It's an interesting part of it. It's a really interesting part of the setup. It's so wonderful actually working with Alan from Aquatic Labs that, to see especially the overlap of CDR, and interesting to see as like sort of terrestrial CDR goes into this sort of tricky, crunchy part of it, but actually knowing that the demand is still there, the ocean-based stuff is going to be very interesting to watch. And it's really nice to have exposure to it.
Wow.
So moving from that, so you've joined McKinsey. Now you have the opportunity to be an entrepreneur. This is an entrepreneurial podcast. This is obviously what we're all about. You are an entrepreneur. You're just in. So you're an intrapreneur, which is a fascinating part of the life cycle of working at McKinsey. So why did you choose the path rather than necessarily being some other kind of specialist, like setting up a business kind of within the umbrella? And what have you learned while doing it?
I think McKinsey is in particular as a place that thrives on intrapreneurship, which is a great word, because we are successful when we are a few steps ahead of where we think our clients will be going. And so it takes folks with a intrapreneurial vision who said, this is going to be important. This is going to be big. Let's invest in it. To me, it's in a way, it's a great best of both worlds experience because I'm able to try new things, develop while also pulling on a huge wealth of talent, resources, people who are excited to build things alongside me and are excited to be part of this. I think maybe a little bit of a tangent, but one thing I learned as we were starting up this water practice is actually how many people at McKinsey had backgrounds in water before McKinsey. And it's backgrounds that make a PhD in oceanography look like rookie stuff. It's like we're talking about former wastewater treatment process engineers. We're talking about former, sales directors for water treatment chemicals companies. Like we're talking about folks who were part of the system integrators and did market intelligence there. So it's like, being part of something that's bigger than yourself. It's like we can just easily get those people involved, which is very cool.
And that probably psyched to like have someone knock on the door and say,
like this thing that you thought you had left behind when you came to McKinsey is like, it's come back and now we really value it. So yeah.
As long as they sort of didn't go completely pale and just sort of like freak out that they were being pulled back in.
By the ghosts of their past.
Whatever it is. It's like, they're trying to pull me back in.
The ghosts of their water treatment past.
Yeah, exactly. And then what's been most unexpected as you built the practice and, you know, built out the business internally? Has anything come up that's really been surprising?
So I think what's been, I would say, unexpected, and this is maybe a better word, is what's been challenging. So I'll answer that question versus the what's been unexpected. I would say this is not a surprise, but something that, you know, I continue to encounter is there's still this huge mismatch in how water gets used and where water investments come from. It's something, and this is, you know, this is not McKinsey saying this. This is others saying this. I don't remember the exact figures, but you know, something like 80% of water gets used for agriculture, and like 10% of investment in water is towards agriculture. And I think, I mean, that's something that we all kind of know in the water space, but it is, I think, a challenge when it comes to thinking about, like, we have these fundamental big water risks and red flags coming up. And when you're thinking about investable business models, it is hard to find ones that are really attacking the issue. That's, I think you asked me what's been challenging about starting the water practice. I would say that's maybe not a McKinsey challenge. That's kind of a fundamental water sector challenge, but it's certainly one that we've seen as, you know, we've talked to investors, we've talked to companies, we've talked to different players who are excited about, quote, doing something in water.
Yeah. Love that.
Yeah, exactly.
No, it's really interesting when you kind of, by the way, in terms of mismatches, the one it's big. It's really sort of fascinating because it's like, we don't see as much of it in ag as we maybe would like or would be reflected by the balance. But the one that really freaks me out is that, you know, we sort of bang on about climate change being water change. For the record, it is, you know, you're looking at kind of like 70 to 75% of the impact of climate change being experienced through the medium of water. And it is less than 2% of climate tech venture fund.
Yeah.
It's crazy. And I think it's inevitable it's going to change. Otherwise, I wouldn't be doing what we're doing. But it is bananas the degree to which mismatches like this come up. But it's also, I don't know, when you look at it through a different lens, you know, if you're thinking about the deployment of or reducing the, whatever you call it, like 70%, 80% number within agriculture, you're working with people who get up at 6 a.m., go to bed at like 10:30 or 11, work themselves basically to the bone for a margin where it goes to kind of 1 to 2, maybe 5% in kind of an outlier year in terms of the net margin. Usually they're underwater and they are kind of like facing down like climate change all at the same time. It's really difficult in the context of that to like climb onto someone's incentive ladder of priorities to be like, do something about the water. And they're like, I'm trying to keep my family going. You know, it's
do something about the water that you might not even be paying for.
Yeah, exactly. But it's the result of a set of incentive structures that are both sort of mind-boggling and also understandable all at the same time. Yeah, it must be, and especially as you're working through it from your perspective, it's difficult to deal with. So from your perspective, like as you look out, you said that a couple of times that you're predicated, like one of McKinsey's strengths is to skate where the puck is going and to already be there when the puck arrives, right?
Yeah.
So how are you thinking about the next 5 years? What is it that you're kind of keeping an eye on that you think is going to be a big sort of driver or motivator of corporate behavior, however you want to frame it?
I would say kind of 3 answers. It depends on what sector that you're looking at. When it comes to the corporate industrial water users, so the semiconductors, the mine companies, the oil and gas, the food and bev, what I'll be looking for is this continued shift from kind of water as a sustainability goal to water as a license to operate imperative, where the risks, whether it's the risks in the supply chain, risks in operations, risks in manufacturing, become real and become more and more, you know, front of mind. And so water starts to rise to the top of executives' lists because, you know, business decisions and business outcomes really start to depend on it. So that's what I'll be looking for. And I think we're starting to see some examples, but I will be interested to see how that plays out across sectors.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm just curious, like we spend all of our time thinking about technology. So obviously we think the technology can solve everything, right?
Yeah.
So nobody needs to worry because the techies have got it. It's more complicated than that, clearly. when you're thinking about, so for example, you work with utilities, but you also work with, C-suites and corporates to think about the higher level. Like, how does this sort of new advent of technology show up in your thinking and the thinking of your clients? Have you seen a material change? Have you seen a softening in the historic kind of sort of willingness to really take this idea of like a new technological paradigm seriously?
Yeah, that's it.
Please say yes.
Yeah. I wish and I think we'd all be better off if the answer was yes. But I think
Unequivocally, yeah.
it is still hard, I think. And this is again where the sort of the excitement about water meets the reality of water is having customers, whether they are utility or industrial customers, who really need to prove that something both works and that something is stable and beneficial and risk-free, with the idea that this is a sector that just fundamentally is in huge need of change and that the solutions needed are big and technology has to be part of it. So I think that I think it still takes this complicated web of partnerships and alliances and multiple, you don't have just one customer for technology. You in a way, you have 4 or 5. I think that part is very, and I would also say it's like, this better than me. So this is, maybe I'm just talking a little bit, but I also do think that there kind of tends to be this crowding of technology in the water space where there's something that gets some excitement and traction, and then there's like 15 different leak detection solutions, or I
wish there was only 15. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, no.
That's another thing, is it can also, the water sector is both small and then in a way almost appears smaller because there could be a lot more innovation across different parts, and instead it tends to cluster a bit.
It's an interesting beast, isn't it? It's like, it can feel small, but then you step back and, the numbers don't lie. It's like $1.4 trillion a year of CapEx and OpEx spend. Like, it's vast.
It's vast, but the market of companies doing innovative technologies is still...
It's small and growing.
It's small.
Yeah, it's so funny to think about it because, like, from our perspective, we see stuff within our portfolio that is getting to sort of escape velocity in terms of revenue, where actually it's becoming, on the balance of likelihood, it's much more likely to become really quite an appreciably large company as it is to be a hole in the ground. They're moving through this. And so because this is just our reality, we're just seeing it going, wow, people are still acting as if like the world hasn't changed. And what we are looking at is a totally different paradigm of doing X, Y, Z, or like, it's going to be really interesting to see what happens when X incumbent or Y private equity company or whatever realize that there is a stupid margin profile here and just an absolutely massive market, but people are still kind of, sitting on their hands of it. It's fine in terms of our timing because we only need people to be taking notice in terms of Fund 1's for Horizon in 3.5 years, and in Fund 2.
Right. You got some time.
Yeah, in 6 years. And so, it's going to be interesting to see it develop.
I think the other dynamic I see play out a good amount, both for strategics and investors who are newer to the water space, but interested to invest, is just, we say this is another sort of, I guess, almost truism about water, but it's very fragmented. And so I think it is still, what I hear a lot is, what is the entry strategy that doesn't involve a multi-year, incredibly time and resource intensive roll-up strategy when I'm trying to enter the water market and I'm not there? Because the quote platform scale companies that exist, there are few enough of them that there's becomes a scarcity premium where they get, valuations are high, and then you're left sort of wondering, well, how do I enter when it's hard for me to judge amongst many, many sub $20 million companies.
So the corollary of that is that if you can build the ones that emerge from the non-obvious to the reasonably obvious, especially for people who are kind of like looking around or who are operating according to kind of a technical paradigm, if you can drive a sort of single truck through that, there are these subsets of focus that may not look obvious from the outside. But yeah, like people just want to spend... They just want to put $200 million to work.
Yeah.
That's what they want to do. Or $1 billion to work. That's fine. They're like, where are the targets? And my refrain when you're talking to all of these big, especially the private equity companies, is we're working on it, right? We're
just 3.5 years.
We're driving on this and we're obvious. And actually, again, like we're getting to the point where I think some people should be taking a reasonable amount of notice. We're just processing our fourth Series B, which doesn't mean that it's like nailed on, but there are some serious companies being built. Anyway, you mentioned this thing about entrepreneurs you haven't got one customer, you've got 4 to 5 customers. Could you say a little bit more about that from your point of view?
I think just maybe diving in, I know you've talked about this on your podcast, but the complexity of the water value chain and the interplay between the end customer, the OEM that you as a kind of innovative technology provider might be tacking onto, the system integrator who's integrating your stuff, other OEMs, the whole system, the engineer who is kind of advising the end customer on what makes sense, because this isn't often within the core competency of the customer. So there's a lot of people and there's a lot of parties to navigate and to provide a compelling value proposition and a easy glide path to getting XYZ technology kind of embedded in a water system. That I think can be the challenge. I'm sure you see it with your portfolio every day.
Yeah, no, we do, and it's really interesting. And like, what's so helpful is to see this from almost. I mean, it's not an external perspective because you're very much like part of this, but it's always helpful to hear because you're a conduit, I reckon, for a lot of like points of view of the people that you work on behalf of. Yeah, I mean, our job is sort of to like when you are getting into a company for which that is true. When you do need to rely on a system integrator and XYZ and XYZ, like recognize the risk, attenuate that risk in terms of, process, advantages, or not do it at all. Because our point of view is that, there's a whole bunch of things within water that actually doesn't, I mean, okay, fine. Everybody needs to usually work with other people in the context of solving XYZ problem with whatever your value proposition is. But if you're going to be involved in a value chain like that, you've got to go in with both eyes wide open and kind of hopped up on a load of Red Bull.
Yes.
Seriously awake, if you're going to get into it. You also mentioned the partnerships side of things. There's some interesting things coming out and coming up. Microsoft is doing some very interesting stuff in terms of water replenishment, especially. We've been talking to another couple of the larger, highest banner sort of acronym, I guess, tech companies, etc. How are you thinking about partnerships internally and any advice for entrepreneurs on that side of things?
Yeah, I think it's a space that is very much ripe for it. There's good opportunities with partnerships, I think, to both get scale and bring parties together that wouldn't otherwise be brought together. A couple that I'm thinking about now are, I think the public-private side is pretty interesting. I think we're seeing a bit, for example, in California, there's a cool initiative around corporates. It's part of the Water Resilience Coalition overall, but
yes,
corporates coming together with the goal of making a kind of meaningful dent in California's projected water gap. And that's through these types of partnerships on water replenishment, on things like groundwater storage, funding and helping develop those projects, which can be interesting. Another one I think we're doing some work on and hope to have a perspective out actually later this year in the utilities space is actually, we talk about climate resiliency for utilities, the need for more funding for utilities, the challenges in this very municipal sector. One of the things we've been thinking about is the way that state and local governments can be more of a partner to utilities, whether that's through funding, whether that's through capital efficiencies, working across helping to kind of consolidate this sector that is so fragmented and helping to get more scale benefits to help in getting some of the investment in resiliency and infrastructure maintenance that the sector really needs. So those are a few. And I think, then on the corporate and tech side, I think there's lots of options for partnerships that we see, whether that's, a channel partnership, whether that is a formal JV, whether that's even a potential acquisition, or that they can all work to start to break through this issue of complexity in the value chain. And you're over there and there's, 4 or 5 different players that you're trying to break through to.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's like walking through the kind of minefield. Yeah, for sure. You bring up infrastructure, and I just wonder your perspective. So, the IRA is generating an unbelievable amount of work domestically in the US across the infrastructure, really of all types. But if there's one thing that I think is right to complain about was that we didn't do a hugely good job of having a massive amount of water support in the IRA. We'd had different bills that came through to create Fed support and one of my favorite graphs is the uptick of investment in drinking water and wastewater infrastructure since 2020, which is one of the only graphs I see that covers that period.
Yeah.
That didn't skip a beat and has just gone from 38 billion to 68 billion. But I'm just curious as to see how you see that kind of idea of infrastructure renewal manifesting in the US market. You work for utilities. Is this something that you're seeing coming through in the work that you're being asked to do?
Yeah. I mean, I think it is definitely, we're seeing both a different level of investment now than 5 years ago or so. And it's still not enough. I think that's the
Testify.
No.
Totally.
I mean, one thing to me actually that was interesting is we talk about the bipartisan infrastructure law, or the IIJA, and that's what gets a lot of attention in terms of water and wastewater investment. But the American Rescue Plan funds post-COVID actually did a huge amount in the kind of 2021, 2022, while IIJA was still like a barely signed fresh bill. And I think one of the things is, those funds were not earmarked for water, but municipalities used them where they needed them. And so it almost, the extent to which that funding got used speaks to. So I think it's good to see. It also created some supply chain issues and price increases and made things tough from that perspective. I think going forward, investment needs for utilities will only grow. There's the continued kind of slow moving avalanche of aging infrastructure. There is now climate change and climate resiliency needs. And so the gap between what's available and what's needed, even with this sort of extra investment and SRF programs more well-funded, will continue to grow. And that's where I think there will be a lot of need for new solutions, whether they're at the state and local level, whether they're with companies, whether there's ways to, figure out ways to free up utilities OpEx to invest more in CapEx. I think those are all going to be pretty important themes to come in the next 5 to 10 years.
I don't know whether this is an unfair question, because I think if you reverse it on me, I don't think it would be sort of quite difficult. Well, I'm going to go for it anyway.
Go for it.
So as you look at the world, and I would understand if you decided to go for something that was kind of like commercially selfish for you, like something that would just increase the amount of work that you needed to do with the water practice. But if you were to wave a magic wand within US water, and that something or some intervention could be manifest, or something could be changed. It could be anything from like a tax break to a pricing signal to like, I don't know, like God knows what. If you could wave a magic wand that you think that would have the biggest delta in terms of its overall impact, what would you choose from your vantage point?
I think if I had a magic wand, I mean, I think, Tom, you've said fundamentally water is a climate adaptation issue, and climate adaptation is water. And we also know that climate adaptation is so underinvested compared to climate mitigation, clean tech, the energy transition. And so I think if I had a magic wand to wave, it would be to correct that imbalance in the amount of funding, not that the energy transition needs less, but just that climate adaptation and by extension water needs more. And it's not a magic wand. It's a real way to have a business model that is climate adaptation focused, of which there are relatively few. So that's, I think, what I would try to change.
I love it. Someone get Sarah a wand. This is what we need. Yeah, no, it's a really interesting one. Is that the other thing that we've been doing for really the last kind of like 3 to 4 months is the degree to which water is also part of the mitigation story, in that people are always going on about hard to abate sectors like cement and the airlines. Water is 5 times as pertinent to the GHG picture as the airlines, and the airlines getting a whole load more press.
Yes, that is true too.
Yeah, it's really, it would be fantastic if people could make it known. But like, I'm very self-critical. I feel like this is sort of like partially my / sort of our general sort of fault within the water sector. I think we could be a lot better at telling our story. Sarah, this has been really fun. Thank you so much for being with us. I really appreciate it. We've come to our closing question, which is, what is the single most important piece of advice you would offer future and aspiring water entrepreneurs?
I would say to have the confidence to push past the complexity. I think that's really the theme that binds. We know water is incredibly important. That's why McKinsey as a practice have invested in it as a firm. Yeah,
absolutely.
We also know it's complicated and it's hard. And that's a lot of what we've been talking about on this podcast. So I think it is really, it's the knowledge, but it's also the confidence to push past the complexity that it takes to build a successful business in the water space, because it's really important. We've got to do it. There's so many who needs to do it. But thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Of course. No, thank you so much for being here. I think that's a really great final answer. I mean, if people want, structures, Hamilton Helmer's 7th power is process modes. If you can get really good at navigating complexity, that is a really interesting underpinning of sustainable competitive advantage.
Yeah.
I feel like that was almost a sort of a consulting framework kind of way to end this. So I'm very proud of myself.
You had me on and I delivered. So you're welcome.
No, fantastic. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us. It was a real pleasure to have you on the Fundamental Model.
Thank you. See you soon.
Cheers. Bye now.